Good morning, everybody. Today is Tuesday, February 16th, and this is In Case You Missed American History. Well, if you're watching this, that means you couldn't make it to class today, and that is okay. I hope you're well. I hope those around you are well, and I hope that you are, I don't know, I hope you're battling through, man. If you're coming back, we haven't got too much longer left, and if you're you're staying home, it's going to change up a little. I think it's going to add a little spark. It's not going to be it's going to be a little bit different than it's been. So hopefully that'll rattle you a little bit. I know this is a time of year that's hard anyway. I don't know, starting to look forward to spring break, getting sick of the cold. I'm not sure, but I hope you're doing okay. If you're not, you need to chit chat. I'm here. Okay. So the plan today is I'm going to run you guys through everything we did today, and get you caught up in case you weren't in class today. So we did trivia. Some quick reminders because I didn't make one of the slides with the date and stuff on it. Today, really kind of the reminder end of things is that if you owe me stuff, you need to get it in. I've got one more assignment to put in Infinite Campus for you guys. That's World War I from home. Otherwise, all your progressive stuff, including the test, is in there. Your World War I test is in there. You need to double check to make sure you've got stuff handed in. There are a number of you guys who owe me tests, both tests we've taken so far. So if you're confused about what you need to do or where you can find it, obviously reach out and I would be more than happy to help you. Second thing on the reminder front is the Decade That Roared is due tomorrow. That assignment is basically our run along with the things we've been talking about here in the 1920s. So make sure that gets done by midnight tomorrow. And again, if you have questions on that, let me know. Yeah, that seems like pretty much all the lead-in or reminder stuff. Now, we went through two slides today. The one is on minority groups, and the other one is on changes in culture. So I'm going to run you guys through those pretty quick here and get you the basic information. So the 1920s were a good time for a lot of people. Pay was up, more consumer goods, the vacuum, the refrigerator, all those things that just generally made life a little bit easier. But not everybody shared in that prosperity the exact same way. Minority groups were still being discriminated against in terrible ways in the South, in the Southwest, and in the North too. Pay was not going to be the same if you were a person of color or if you were a woman. Obviously, treatment under the law was going to be different. So not everyone shared in the prosperity of the 1920s. A couple of significant events that happened during the 1920s for Black Americans were the Great Migration. During the 1920s, it became very common for Black Americans who lived in the South, who were still living in the shadow of slavery and living through segregation and the KKK. It became very common for them to go, the situation's going to be better in the North. And so they would pick up and leave an agricultural or farming lifestyle to take jobs in factories in northern cities. Now, obviously, factory pay was going to be better, period. All right. And so they moved to places like Chicago and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Boston and New York. And when they got to those cities, they found that everything wasn't milk, honey, rainbows, and kittens like they thought it was probably going to be. The situation was better, but cities were still segregated. Like for instance, Chicago's South Side was more of the minority groups of people, while the North Side was more of the white people. Milwaukee to this day is one of the most segregated cities in America. And so the segregation in cities also meant that you didn't have that true equality and that people were treating people differently even in those northern cities. Because of this Great Migration and because it happens pretty quickly, the minority parts of the cities, the Black parts of the cities, the Hispanic parts of the cities become overcrowded really, really quickly. And when you add too many people into a small area, you're gonna stress that area. It's going to break down the buildings faster. It's going to cause sanitation issues. It's going to cause issues with clean water. And the cities often either weren't going to do what it took to catch up, or they couldn't do what it took to catch up because of the population going so big so fast. And so Black civil rights leaders like Marcus Garvey advocated for the idea of, okay, fine, if we're going to have to live in the segregated part of the city, let's make our part of the city a utopia, an ideal place, if you're not English right now. And he suggested that Black Americans start their own businesses and that Black Americans shop at those Black-owned businesses and shop at the Black-owned grocery store and shop at the Black-owned dressmaker or tailor that was going to make clothes, and that these Black communities should become this like community of pride where we're going to take care of ourselves, we're going to take care of each other, we're going to take care of our community, and we're going to make this a place where everybody wants to come. And you end up with things like that, like there's a Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s where the Harlem part of New York becomes kind of a cultural center for a lot of things. And more or less, Garvey sometimes gets accused of reverse racism, but I think more he's trying to promote pride in the Black community wherever it might be. One really negative thing that happens during the 1920s is the burning of Black Wall Street. Wall Street is obviously in New York City. It's where the stock exchange are. It's where a number of big American businesses have their headquarters, and it's seen as a focal point or a focus point of our economy, where big things happen. For Black Americans in the 1920s, that was Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma was considered to be Black Wall Street. It had Black-run businesses. It had the headquarters of Black-owned major businesses. In the early 1920s, there's a race riot in Tulsa, and the violence extends into this area known as Black Wall Street. And white people torch, basically, you can see the picture, torch that area. Now, I'm kind of going through a quick version of what we talked about in class because I know you've got limited time if you're doing this. One of the probably the biggest negative events, single events carried out towards minority groups in the 1920s is the burning of Black Wall Street. We also saw a resurgence in the KKK and a spread out of the KKK. It seems like every 40 to 60 years or so, the KKK or these white power groups kind of have like this rise in population and impact in the country. And during the 1920s, that was evident. With the Great Migration North, it seemed like the KKK kind of spread its fingers outward too into the North. And so they started to get more involved in life in the North. For instance, Wisconsin has pockets of KKK activity still to this day. Latino and Hispanic farm workers in the Southwest were being discriminated against and still segregated against in their communities. They were being paid a very low wage and being asked to work really long hours. But at this point, there wasn't the level of union organization that you'll get in a couple of decades with Latino farm workers movement and Cesar Chavez. But you're starting to see an outcry. You're even getting some Latino workers moving away from those agricultural jobs in the Southwest towards more cities and factory life. But in those factories, they're often, the lowest paid, discriminated against. Asian immigrants face the same amount of discrimination on the West Coast. They were very scrutinized or kind of picked at by the people that lived around them because they were a different race. They looked different. Their languages were harder for white people to understand. And so like the level of education that was offered was poor. And often they were the poorest. They were the worst paid people in the factory systems in the West. And because of that, often, again, asked to do really dangerous jobs. So there were some gains in the 20s. You have those Black-run communities. You have the Harlem Renaissance. You do have an increase in pay. But the discrimination and the segregation and the violence against Black Americans and their own and the things that they owned kind of hit kind of an all-time high in the 1920s. Okay. The next slide is about kind of changes in culture. And what we're looking at here is two things. By 1920, over half the population of America lived in cities. Farm jobs weren't paying $273 a year. Nope. When you're getting $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 for working in a factory, the farming is really hard work. They're really long days working in the factory. Sure, it's hard work, but the days aren't as long. I would rather earn 7 times the money working in the factory. And so a lot of people move to cities to take factory jobs or move to cities because there are more opportunities, move to cities because there's more culture. And so the population of urban or city areas explodes while the population of rural or country areas starts to diminish. Cities change. Sanitation becomes important. Garbage pickup, a lot of those progressive ideas we talked about. But they also start to look differently because they start building skyscrapers, steel, which allows the building to move in the wind because they do. I don't know if you know that. And the use of the elevator allow buildings to go up instead of out, so you could save space. with the elevator, being up higher was seen as a status symbol. Rent was higher. You had the penthouse suite, the people that lived there up there that were important. And so not only does it save space, but it also is making money for people. And because of that, there almost turns into this weird competition. As you could build the tallest building, okay? And the big competition was in New York City between the Chrysler Building and the Empire State Building. And as one built up, the other built up. And eventually the Empire State Building ended up being taller because it had kind of I'm going to call it a pole to make it easier, that you could dock a blimp to. Okay. And so the Empire State Building that was completed in 1930 was kind of the biggest building at that time. It was the Burj Khalifa of that time period. One really odd thing about the 1920s is this time period called Prohibition. It formally goes from 1920 to 1933, where the buy, sale, manufacture, and use of alcohol in the United States was illegal from 1920 to 1933. This has been discussed for a while. There were people that thought that alcohol use in the United States was the reason why we had so much crime and domestic abuse and things like that. And so the movement gained some traction, and in 1917, Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which banned the use and sale and manufacture of alcohol. It didn't become an actual thing until 1920 when the Volstead Act gets passed and the money to enforce all of this happens. But if you can imagine something that's been legal all along suddenly becomes illegal, you're going to have people that are still going to want to use that thing. And so while violent crime, some kinds of violent crime decrease, drinking decreases because poor people can't afford it, because if it's illegal, it's going to be more expensive. But there are still people drinking. It turns every grandmother who has a sip of wine into a criminal. It turns every person who finds an illegal bar to have a beer into a criminal. And it causes a lot of corruption because a lot of money could be made. Racketeering, illegal gang-related activity is on the rise. And those gangs often paid off the police to look the other way and allow things to happen. And so you get people like Al Capone in Chicago, or Scarface Al Capone in Chicago, who run the alcohol, gambling, and prostitution businesses while donating money to churches and schools to look like good guys, but also paying off the police so they could do what they needed to do. And so what you get is people like Capone ran places that made alcohol or smuggled alcohol into the country from Canada. And those people that smuggled or moved it around were called bootleggers, like hiding a flask in your boot, hiding the alcohol. I think you get the idea. And they would deliver it to places called speakeasies, which were illegal secret bars. There's a bunch of speakeasies in the Milwaukee, Chicago, Madison area. And some of them even still, they are still like they have special passwords to get in or things. In the 1920s, some of these bars were secretive, and some were out in the open because if the police are on the payout, why bother? Capone ran Chicago with by not only donating money to look like a good guy, but through fear. People didn't rat on him. You got an Italian necktie. They cut your throat. They pulled your tongue through. They would kill people that were enemies of theirs. There was the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. They would make people sleep with the fish, which means they would put concrete. They'd put your feet in buckets, pour wet concrete around your feet, and then take you out and throw you in Lake Michigan. Even if you're a strong swimmer, that ain't going to work. They would take people across the Wisconsin state line and shoot them in cornfields and then pay the farmers to plow the bodies under. And so unless you thought you could unseat Capone and become the big criminal in an area, you weren't going to mess with him or people like him in other American cities. And so it becomes this big billion-dollar business selling illegal alcohol. And it was really hard for the police or the FBI to enforce all stuff. Al Capone was America's most wanted for all these things he did, but they eventually ended up arresting him for not paying his taxes. Okay. 1933, a couple of things caused the end of Prohibition. First of all, it's not working. It's not working. We're causing problems. The other thing is, by selling alcohol and opening up the Budweiser factory and the Jack Daniel's factory, we're getting people jobs. And by 1933, the country is in the Great Depression, and alcohol's, apparently it's good for business. Okay. So That's our 2 slides for today. If you have any questions about anything, please reach out. Let me know. I'll be more than happy to help you. If you're behind in your homework or you're behind on your tests, get yourself caught up. You guys, you got to be a little self-motivated here. Even coming back to school, you're going to be in charge of yourself 3 out of the 5 days a week. Only 2 days a week that some of you guys are going to be sitting in here in front of me. So do what you can. Let me know if you need me, and be well, my friends. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.